Aloni wali gale wal kakachi se dokuman Darase tirachisa ak Afrika toromumma
Tola speakna Harki kenya la tumirga Hundunu nijarae Tiyididus biyeraga Itifufa Raboros Gadamesi Kota horo Itifufa Raboros Gadamesi Kota horo Yona gena Dina kabune firon falla Kanjalala nuti dube Kunu fajo iti bekna Ulaganis na mumada Tirri sirbi gafajira Shtirri, 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 shtirri Warrajab
Aloni wali gale wal kakachi se dokuman Darase tirachisa ak Afrika toromumma Aloni wali gale wal kakachi se dokuman Darase tirachisa ak Afrika toromumma
Kenna dubino duma jibbitu jara tulle Lenja malkoti sare baya tulle
Lenja malkoti sare baya tulle
Kata bokan bobara Majidan kabate Mikanya devi makina sigate
Mikanya devi makina sigate
Kata michiti beke Haj ada michiti eke Jarra na ifi baro Toko bungola taroro Shiloni amaga jalu Jininu danda eni lalu Pagoda jaba kundensa Afrikada foromu mancha Chibole apabole Chibole apabole Chibole apabole Chibole apabole Chibole apabole Chibole apabole Opaya Gama Gotu manduru teti ilman orkitu Oromu mani jaduru atuntu tiftu Yo walofra yaka mise kafatani Yo madasa bonu masi kafatani Ana jedin, ana jedin, ana jedin, ana jedin Yo sora kanjiru duka didani Yo so karanjiru irra korani Yo sora kanjiru duka didani Yo so karanjiru irra korani Kana jedin, 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 kana jedin.
This is the future of Africa. In this program, we focus on Horn of Africa's political, economic, and socio-cultural aspects. Let's share our vision, hopes, and professional critics. All views are esteemed. Stay with us. Dr. Trevor, welcome to this program.
Again.
Dr. Trevor Truman Galato is a retired family doctor who helped to train Oromo health workers in Campus, Sudan from 1988 to 1991. Has reported and campaigned on human rights in Ethiopia since 1994, writing about 60 reports on the human rights abuse in Ethiopia for the OROMIA support group. Recently, he traveled to Egypt for a similar mission. We will have discussion on this and other related issues. And welcome again, Dr. Trevor.
Thank you for having me, Hussein.
Yeah, well, let's start by looking at the current human rights violation worldwide. How do you see the current status of human rights violations across the globe and in countries of Africa in particular?
Yeah, globally, there has been a shift away from observing the human rights agenda over the last 20 years or so, and indeed, possibly ever since the Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, where there was a huge amount of enthusiasm and lots of conventions, UN conventions, followed in the 1950s and 60s in terms of human rights. But we've seen a drift away from that, unfortunately, globally. And it isn't just in places like China and Russia, but we've seen our own treatment of refugees, for example, showing a much more right-wing agenda, if you like, and disregard for the rights of refugees under the current government in the UK and the previous administration in the USA. So globally, things are not good. There's been a rise of right-wing politics across Europe, both in Western Europe and Eastern Europe. There's always been a problem with racist politics there. They say you can judge the quality of society by the way it treats its prisoners and its refugees. And I think this is being shown to be very true now. The treatment of refugees across the planet is medieval in most places, and at best it's unfair and unjust. In Africa, there is a general culture, as in most poor countries, of welcoming refugees. But where there are resources limitations, places like Djibouti and Somaliland, the treatment of refugees is particularly poor. And in Egypt, there are particular reasons why it's bad there, which we'll get on to shortly. Yemen is another awful place for refugees. In Egypt, we have the added problem with the Nile, the dam, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. And there's been a lot of public resentment whipped up about that by Egyptian politicians, and quite stupidly then transferred onto refugees from Ethiopia, who are the people who are opposed to the government that's actually building the dam. Mm-hmm. But such is the rise of populist policies that populations are willing to follow this sort of jingoism and hostility, as we saw in the States under Trump, and as we're seeing now in the UK, and as we witness in Egypt.
Thank you for that highlight.
Thank you, Sid.
Thank you for that highlight. And now we'll dive into a more specific issue of the discussion of the focus of our discussion today. And I know that recently you did travel to Egypt. And what was the objective of your travel? And what did you observe in relation to refugees or migrants over there?
It was the second time that I'd been asked to go to Egypt. I went in 2013 and recorded many interviews with refugees there, but was unable to publish all that information because of other responsibilities and getting out other reports and asylum work. So I've always felt a lack in my reports because of that. And when I was asked the second time, this time by the Oromo Elders Union, representing all different regions within Oromia, amongst the refugees there. So a great unifying force within the refugees in Cairo, and they asked us to go and encourage and empower the refugees there, and infuse some hope in their rather desperate situation, but to record what's going on, to record their experiences in Ethiopia, because we wanted to find out what's happening under the current regime as well as the TPLF, and also to find out and publish what's the life of refugees is like in Egypt, and it has not improved since 2013. If anything, it's got worse. The misrepresentation that UNHCR seems to have got worse. The contact with UNHCR certainly seems to have deteriorated, and the security for refugees on the streets in Cairo is really pretty poor.
And that's good. A bit. I would like to get your reflection on their life. How is the life of the refugees in Egypt, for instance? They are under serious problem. Can you somewhat tell us briefly?
Like many places which host refugees, the journey is often horrific. Every place is subject to problems with people smugglers or guides, and many people die en route going to Djibouti across the desert there, or Hargeisa, and especially across the desert in Sudan and Libya. The journeys were hideously dangerous because of the likelihood of being picked up by traffickers who tortured people for ransom money in the Sinai Desert. That was an area controlled then by ISIS in around 2013 or so. That seems to have ceased. The Sudanese army, I think, has obliterated the people that were doing this trafficking. So that is one improvement. But the large organized smuggler gangs selling people really as property across Sudan, and culminating in their being dropped in Aswan or Cairo, often owing large amounts of money, sometimes with members of the family left as hostages with the smugglers. And then when people fail to pay the exorbitant prices that they're asked, then they're subject to harassment or physical beatings, and in some cases rape, by these smugglers in order to extort more money from them to pay what they feel they are owed. Several $1,000s per individual refugee. So it's a very harsh life in Egypt. The hostility from the general population is something that some NGOs feel that Ethiopians exaggerate, but it's a fairly consistent report of every refugee we spoke to who encountered the authorities. Often they were helped by individual Egyptians, but any contact with the police, with health facilities, was, and when trying to get kids to school, was hindered by this hostility about the Nile and the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Some refugees reported being told by doctors in the hospital or nurses in the hospital, go back to Ethiopia and turn the Nile back on, and then we'll treat your wife. This sort of thing. And that was so universally reported. I can't think that it isn't a significant factor against Oromo and the small number of other people from Ethiopia that are in Cairo.
Thank you so much. That's horrific, yes. Now, let's make it more specific. I guess there are a number of Oromo refugees over there in Egypt. Would you mind telling us their status as a refugee? Is there a different kind of differential treatment, or what is there?
Well, to begin with, the number of refugees in Cairo is staggering. There are 280,000 refugees, over 250,000 in Cairo, out of the population of, 25 million or so. And of these, only 2,000 are resettled every year. That's one in 64, isn't it? Yeah. So it's is a very low number who are resettled every year. But this is not including those who've been refused refugee status, whose files are closed. We don't know how many thousands of those there are, and it's not including people who are still waiting for a decision to be made on their files. Work is very difficult, especially if you've been if your file is closed, because then working is illegal. Education is difficult. It's difficult to get schooling unless you've got private funding. And so many people feel their life is blocked. It's as though they've been stuck in a warehouse, and just like being in some refugee camps. And then on top of that, you've got the danger of deportation. If you've got reason to be picked up by the police, and it could be just being an accidental bystander at an incident, then if you haven't got the right documents, then you're liable to be deported. And UNHCR is not as active in preventing deportations as it used to be once if people have been refused status. Yes, elsewhere there is hostility. We see this. Yemen, Djibouti, Somaliland, Sudan, Kenya. But in Egypt, and especially Djibouti, Somaliland, and Egypt, there's no danger of, there's no truth whatsoever in the claim that a proportion of these are economic migrants. They are fleeing real persecution to end up there. And they are treated with considerable hostility.
Yeah, considerable hostility. Are there targeted attacks, for instance? Do you think that the life of refugees is under risk, or how do you?
There's always a risk. Always a risk, because there are cumulative risks, aren't there? If you're not well fed, then you're more likely to get an infection that's going to damage you. If you're a refugee, you're at risk of all sorts of things, which compound to make your life expectancy shorter as a refugee than it would be even if you're a member of the poorer sections of society as a member of the host community. But there was something else I would say. Targeted attacks certainly occur for some people who are specifically targeted by the Ethiopian government acting from the embassy in Cairo. This would be well-known Kero activists. I certainly know of one who's been badly beaten several times by people from the embassy. People in the media, people who used to report for OMN, that they are at particular risk from Ethiopian government people. and anybody who's had anything to do with the government in the past who has jumped ship, so to speak. And these would be targeted by Ethiopian government. Ethiopians as a whole are targeted by the Egyptian population for abuse, but this does spill into physical violence, including knife attacks and stealing things and taking money, including by police or people pretending to be police. As I say, this is exacerbated by the hostility because of the Nile, but all foreigners are subject to xenophobia in Cairo. It's not specific to people from Ethiopia. And as I say, several NGO people have said to me, there's nothing specific about Ethiopians because of the Nile. That's just the excuse they use when they're abusing Ethiopians. They'd use a different excuse if they're abusing other people. I'm not sure I agree with that sentiment entirely. I think there is some specific abuse because of the Nile Dam. Yep, on the targeted attacks by smugglers and smuggler gangs. Those are nasty people, and they not only will they beat you up on the street, but if you're not there to demand money from, they'll break into your house and rape your wife. And they're not. They make life very fearful for thousands and thousands of refugees in Cairo.
That's a very complicated problem. If you look back home, people are targeted, imprisoned, killed. There is a kind of aggressive wars throughout the nation, and it's a kind of pushing people out of the nation. So it seems the process is going to continue, but overall, from your experience, what do you advise these immigrants in general terms?
Well, make sure that you're going to a place that's going to be safer than what you're going from. Remember, you're losing all sorts of support networks by running. And do not go to Djibouti, Somaliland, or Egypt. That's my advice. I'd avoid those places. And Yemen, don't go there. They're places where you are. Your life expectancy will be limited by your being there. It will make a material difference to the chances of you making your birthday in 10 years' time by being in those places.
Okay, do you have some advice to the UN, UNHCR, and other human rights advocates internationally?
Well, especially the UN Human Rights Council and the UN High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR. The last Human Rights Council findings and the report from the Commission of Inquiry into Abuses in Ethiopia have absorbed some of the disinformation about the Oromo Liberation Army and have published a biased account of their human rights record. And so I'm rather disappointed with that. But there has been a tendency within UN bodies, and especially UNHCR, over the last 4 years especially, which evidence of bias against the Oromo in terms of decision-making, in terms of refugee status. There's evidence of this, especially in Somaliland, but also in Egypt and Djibouti. there does seem to be a systemic problem with a distortion of the view of Ethiopia by the UN, especially those two bodies, the UN Human Rights Council and the High Commission for Refugees. I think they are biased against Oromo interests, and I think that is because they're infiltrated by people either with a conscious or subconscious bias against the Oromo.
What's expected of the Oromos to tackle that kind of problem, to create understanding so that attention will be given to the Oromos and in general terms and refugees around the world?
Unfortunately, it's not a level playing field. You don't have to just tell the truth, because there are people out there actively trying to undermine the Oromo and the other marginalized majority perspectives of Ethiopia. And there are people actively trying to discourage that. So it is an uphill job, but we have to report more and report better and get better at getting the information into the international arena so that people don't see Ethiopia just through this lens, this Amhara lens of a single unified entity. It's like seeing the British Empire through people who wave the Union flag, the Union Jack. It's well, you know how I feel about that.
Yep.
But yes, it has to be. This has to be addressed. Yeah.
Thank you. I personally believe that the real cause of the problem is the Ethiopian government, and perhaps specifically in relation to the Oromo people, it's the regional government of Oromia, because what's happening over there is really a daunting challenge for citizens to live there peacefully. So people are pushed out of the country. And do you have any advice for the government of Ethiopia and the Oromian national state government in general terms?
We've got to stop these parallel disgraces of supremacism of one group over others. This is the underlying racist default problem in Ethiopia, is Amhara supremacism, their belief that they are better than and therefore entitled to govern the rest of Ethiopia. And the second is this culture of dominance and abuse that's it's absolute zero sum, without any tolerance of dissent, and the absolute barbarism within the security apparatus in Ethiopia. This 100% violence, and it's fascist, the way it's performed. The culture of violence and cruelty within the judicial and the penal systems has got to stop. So there are two disgraces, as I say, that this racist hostility, and it doesn't just go from Amhara to Oromo, it goes Oromo backwards as well. There's a whole wall of problem there. And this abuse of human rights being accepted as the norm, that is a huge damage over the next decade. So it's going to take a long time to reverse.
Thank you so much, Dr. Trevor. And I've got a statement by joint statement kind by Australia, Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, United Kingdom, and the United States, and they have shown deep concern about human rights violation. But most of the time, these kind of statements they don't have a real power, and I think they lack action in general terms. And do you have something to say in general terms? Because there must be some kind of push from the international community.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the American legislation that was meant to lead to sanctions has yet to show its teeth at all. And we've got to stop pussyfooting around. I mean, people are beginning to look as though Abiy may in somehow be a representative voice, or he might be a genuine seeker of peace, which is absolute nonsense. The West has got to get rid of Abiy, basically. Let's not pussyfoot around. They've got to ensure that there are inducements in one direction and obstacles in another direction, so he's left with only one choice, that's to get out. And it's the international community that will have to sponsor a dialogue amongst the marginalized peoples of Ethiopia. There's no point going back to the same old crew, the people who've dominated for the last 150 years. There's no point just changing the actors and having the same play. We've got to rebuild the whole theatre. It's the inherent structure of Ethiopian society that is at fault. And this is the domination of one group by others at the expense of human rights. And if we put human rights at the top of the agenda, then we will sort things out.
Great, at the expense of human rights. Okay. Now, I would like to give you a chance for your final remark or remarks in the split of second.
Right, well, we've just got to keep getting the accurate information out there, publicizing it as much as we can, and working hard to give people the truth, so that the best weapon against disinformation is, of course, the truth. But be aware that the Oromo diaspora is not sleeping while all this is going on, and that a consensus with the backing of the majority of Oromo people is beginning to emerge and get some recognition. And this will empower and enrich the movement for a people-led democratic change in Ethiopia. It's the momentum behind that we want to increase, and it's programs like OROMIA11 that are helping to do that. So hats off to you, Hussein. It's a good job that you do, and it's something that we really must push.
Thank you so much. I understand that there are a lot of things going on. Yes, I know Oromos, majority of the Oromos have been coming together. They prepared the Sefu and the Kaku document and the consensus document whereby all people can understand each other. That will be communicated, and I think in our following program we'll be focusing on that by talking to you and all other actors involved in this. Dr. Trevor, specifically, what's your advice for the Oromos? From my side, for instance, I would like to see the Oromos more united and have strong institutional foundations, as well as keep on educating the Oromo people for their rights and for the questions they have been demanding on democracy, good governance, human rights, and so on. Specifically, what's your advice for the Oromo people?
Well, we've all got to work hard to correct the disinformation that's being spread about the Oromo. We have to have confidence, though, in the growing consensus that is developing among us. And we should communicate this confidence to politicians in the West and to the people back in Ethiopia, that we mean business, the Oromo struggle is not going to stop until the Oromo people are in power in Oromia. So it's a question of confidently expressing this and going ahead, giving information and correcting the disinformation that's being spread about us. But be aware that this unity that is developing, it has always been there inside Ethiopia, but the unity now that's developing in the diaspora as well is a very encouraging sign. And yes, Jabatu, it's all going in the right direction. But there is a great need to act urgently, because every week delayed is hundreds, thousands of lives being lost, so, and whole families and livelihoods being uprooted. So yes, this is work hard to inform, to unite, and to struggle in whatever way you can.
With this, we conclude our discussion today with Dr. Truman on the current human rights condition of Ethiopia and Oromia. For those of you who would like to share your vision, hopes, and professional critics, the door is open. Please contact me through my Facebook. My name is Dr. Hussein Kader. See you next time. And Dr. Galeto, profoundly thank you.
Galatoma.
Galatoma ulfaadha isinis jiraadha. This is the future of Africa. In this program, we focus on Horn of Africa's political, economic, and socio-cultural aspects. Let's share our vision, hopes, and professional critics. All views are esteemed. Stay with us.